Strength and conditioning programs must adapt to many factors: the athlete's level, the team's or structure's objectives, the specific demand of the sport, and much more. Because of this, programs can take a lot of different forms to remain as effective as possible under any circumstance. One important distinction in programming is about the type of sport: single deadline sports or repeated deadline sports. In this video, I will break down the difference between these two categories and explain how they affect training. A repeated deadline sport is one in which the athletes are expected to perform at multiple points in the season and often on a regular basis. The most common example is team sports such as soccer or basketball, in which the season starts around September and ends around May, and in which they have to perform every single weekend, sometimes even more. In this case, athletes must arrive ready at the beginning of the season and remain ready throughout, even though they can obviously still improve during the season. Single deadline sports, however, are a bit of a misnomer. They don't actually have a genuinely single deadline, but more of a time period in which peak performance is required. Track and field and CrossFit are good examples. The season starts in September, but in CrossFit the competitive season starts around March, and in track and field around February. In the French calendar at least, it may vary depending on the country. For these athletes, the season is constructed as a gradual build-up toward the key period. Of course, they can still compete outside of it, whether to gain experience or test themselves, but those results matter less. The most important is to perform at the right competitions. And in fact, sometimes it's better to have disappointing results all year long if it means peaking for the most important competitions. In repeated deadline sport, it's the opposite. Every match counts the same, like 3 points in soccer for example, no matter when it happens in the season. Still, even if those sports, some periods are more important than others. Let's take the example of Paris Saint-Germain, or Paris Saint-Germain. Each year they compete in the French League for the whole season and in the Champions League as well, the European Cup. And this Champions League usually has an elimination phase that starts at the second half of the season. Since they usually dominate their domestic competition, they can afford to not be at their very peak at the beginning of the season to build up toward the period with more importance and more frequent matches. Now let's look at how this impacts strength and conditioning programming. In repeated deadline sports, it's important to reach a pretty good physical level very early, usually during the summer preparation. From that point, the goal will be to maintain or even slightly improve the overall level while being able to perform week after week. This usually means fluctuating training volumes and intensity within a week with some micro peakings right before matches. Let's note that for youth athletes, sometimes long-term development takes priority over immediate performance, since their future potential is seen as the most important part. The advantage of repeated deadline sport is that small programming mistakes can be quickly corrected. The downside is that athletes rarely reach their full peak potential during the season, as they have to balance competition's demands and trainings. This is what we call short-term programmation. In single deadline sports, the approach is more about long-term programmation. Training is organized to gradually build throughout the season toward one key competitive period, allowing athletes to truly peak when it matters most. In short, the type of sport is just one of many factors strength and conditioning coaches must take into account when creating a program. By tailoring training to the demands of the sport, whether short-term or long-term preparation, they can create the most efficient path to performance. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, suggestions, or anything else, feel free to drop a comment down below. And if you want to contact me straight through my social medias, the links are in the description. I'll see you next Sunday, and until then, train hard, stay consistent, and never forget, make yourself proud.